So good noon, everybody. I'm Jozefien de Leersnyder, and it's my pleasure today to comment to the paper presented by Tariq Madood on religious diversity in a secular society. So actually what I want to do today is to focus on the practical implications of religious education at school, and I'm going to argue that it may be very beneficial to expand this notion of religious education to multicultural education and practice. And that by doing so, by having multiculturalist education and practice at schools, we can actually take a big step forward in improving our societies, making them more empathic towards each other, but also to make the minority people in our societies thrive and realize their talents and potential, and hopefully then, which is a step towards less segregation at the labor market, as Professor pointed out. Now, the main argument that Professor Madood made is that schools may actually play an important role in institutionalizing multiculturalism through their engagement with different religions. Multiculturalism, as defined by Professor Madood and by social psychologists like me, is that differences should not be downplayed or should be ignored, but they should be recognized and they should be celebrated. And in doing so, people may actually express their specific sociocultural identities, but also learn from each other, get each other's perspective, and as such build a sense of community and belonging. Now, applying this to religion, and especially religion at school, and this is what we just heard from Professor Madood, is this proposal that schools can offer religious education to all their pupils. So it's education about all different types of religion and how these varieties of faiths and their past and in the past and in the present may shape how people actually function in today's societies. So this course is then taught to all children of all faiths and non-faiths, and this course can also go hand in hand with an optional course of religious instruction in which children are actually inducted to a certain faith. And in a truly multiculturalist perspective, as Professor Madood pointed out, this should not be merely limited to induction to Catholic faith, but should be tailored to all the specific needs and religious needs of the students and their parents that are present at school. Now, I fully endorse this multiculturalist view on religious education, yet I do have three main concerns, which I labeled: we need more, we are all multicultural, and let's practice what we preach. The first point I want to make is that schools may indeed play a crucial role in institutionalizing multiculturalism, but that they may and must do so through multiple roads, not only by focusing on religion. In fact, and as Professor Madood has argued, religion should be viewed no differently than other forms of diversity, such as diversity in ethnicity, in race, in social class, gender, sexuality, and so forth. True multiculturalism and multicultural schools, as well as multicultural education, should thus engage with all these forms of diversity. Therefore, I thus propose to expand the course on religious education to a course on a national curriculum on multiculturalism education. In that course, students would learn how our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are very closely intertwined to our engagements in different sociocultural contexts. So, and to clarify, a sociocultural context is any context or environment that is characterized by a specific meaning system. Those are values, attitudes, preferences, stereotypes, representations that are shared by people engaging in that context, as well as by a socio-structural system. Those are institutions, ways of interacting with one another, and also cultural products, such as books that we read. So, defined like this, religion clearly qualifies as a sociocultural context in which people can participate. But defined like this, also other types of sociocultural contexts exist, such as different nations, different ethnicities, race, gender, sexuality, and so forth. Any education that is targeted at instigating a multicultural climate should thus not be restricted to religion, but expanded to incorporate education on race, ethnicity, gender, and so forth. So, but why is this important? Well, let me show you some data. Firstly, there is a very nice and big study from the United States that shows that educating people on multiculturalism may actually benefit intergroup relations. So what they did in this study is they had a group of college students with different cultural backgrounds engage for 1 semester with one another, talking about how their engagement in different socio-cultural contexts actually shaped their experiences both in the classroom and at college, as well as in the wider society. So and what they found at the end of the semester is that for the students who had participated in their course, their intergroup empathy, for instance, how much they understood and took the perspective of people from another cultural group went up. So you can actually see there's a big difference between post-measurement of this intercultural empathy after taking the course than before the course, and also in comparison to people who did not take the course. And I'm not going to show you the data, but believe me, the same effects are exactly true for students' ability to understand structural inequalities, to have positive affect towards people from different cultural backgrounds, and to collaborate with and actually take action on behalf of people from different cultural groups. Secondly, I think multiculturalism education is important because it may actually empower minorities to navigate those institutions that are rooted in different sociocultural contexts than their own. And a good example is the school context, because, for instance, our Belgian school system, as well as the European American school system, they are all rooted in a Western European idea of what it means to be a person. We need to be autonomous, independent learners, we need to be successful and unique, and this is a view on the person and on learning that's not shared in other cultural contexts, such as, for instance, contexts of lower social class, of non-Western cultural contexts. So, my colleague, Nicole Steffens from the University of Harvard, actually developed an intervention program in which that was targeted at what she calls first-generation students, so students whose parents never attended college. And what we know is that for these students, their grade point averages at university are much lower than for students whose parents did attend college. So, and she invited these students to attend one of 2 panel discussion sessions. And in one session, senior college students talked about how their experiences at college were actually shaped by their sociocultural class. In the other, the standard panel session, social class was not mentioned at all. So and what she found is when she looked at the grade point average of these students at the end of the year, was that the achievement gap actually manifested itself for the students who had attended the standard session. So you can see for the students who had parents with no college education, they had much lower average scores than for the students who had parents in higher social class. But this achievement gap completely disappeared for students who had attended that 1-hour panel session. So this kind of looks like magic, no? Isn't it? A 1-hour panel session that can change how much people score in class, isn't it? Well, let me tell you, it's not magic. Actually, what the researchers found was that by getting insight into how social class actually shapes how you experience, both psychologically and structurally, the world around you, helped students to seek out the resources that they needed to navigate that new context. And seeking out these resources and being aware of them actually increased their grades. And this is an effect that persisted for at least 2 years after the intervention took place. So this is a very powerful thing after a 1-hour intervention. Now, the second point I want to make, and let me find my notes, is that we are all multicultural. And actually this point is very important for making multiculturalism work and to get people stand behind the policies that we want to introduce. Now, what do I mean with we are all multicultural? Well, I mean that we all function at the intersection of different sociocultural contexts. So immigrant minorities, just like anybody else and majorities, we construct our identities not on the basis of one aspect, such as religion, but on many different aspects, such as race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, and so forth. So focusing on religious education only may make people feel excluded from diversity. If religion is not a core aspect of your identity, but for instance, race or ethnicity is, or a specific intersection of these things, being a Muslim minority with homosexual feelings, for instance, you may feel excluded from a course that explicitly focuses on religious education. So this is true for minority members, but maybe even more true for majority members, as we know that most of the majority members in Belgium are actually not religious. So, and this may actually, when we then focus in our courses on religion only, it may actually work to the contrary of the purpose. It may actually fuel stigmatization of people who have religion as being strange, as well as fuel the perception that diversity is not about us. Yet, by educating people on the myriad of socio-cultural contexts that actually shape their thoughts and feelings and behaviors on a daily basis, they may realize that multiculturalism is also about them. And this is actually very crucial, as I said, to make diversity policies work. And evidence for this comes from a large-scale study in the United States in which they asked white majority men and minority men for their endorsement of diversity policies, and what they found was that minority men endorsed diversity policies much more than majority men. But when the researchers took into account how much the men perceived that diversity was about them, this effect completely disappeared. So what you can see is that when people perceive that multiculturalism is about them, they support policies for implementing diversity, whether they are minority or majority. That does not matter anymore then. We should make our concept of multiculturalism much more inclusive. So, and that actually brings me to our last point. Making multiculturalism about all of us and being very inclusive about what multiculturalism is about and at who it is targeted actually is the first step towards practicing what we preach. Practicing multiculturalism. But we should go much further. It makes no sense to educate people on multiculturalism if our schools don't implement multiculturalism themselves. So if we do not equip the teachers in our schools and the directors to implement a multicultural climate in their classrooms, that does not make sense. And it refers to things that Professor Mudud said earlier, or to Orhan's notion of lip service multiculturalism. So in the first step into the right direction, and I resonate with Tariq here, is that we should include in the curriculum of future teachers a class on how to deal with diversity, as well as that we need to make workshops tailored at installing diversity in the schools. So because it's too often not that teachers lack motivation or are willing to deal with diversity, but they simply lack the tools and the knowledge to do so. So we should really equip them with those tools. So I hereby also really encourage schools to employ a diversity coordinator, for instance, who is equipped with that knowledge to install a multicultural climate at school. So and that this practice of installing a multicultural climate at school actually has very far-reaching effects is something that I want to demonstrate based on a large-scale study from our own lab at the University of Leuven. Is the STIL study, the Children of Immigrants Longitudinal Study, in which we surveyed over more than 3,000 pupils in 66 Flemish schools. So what Professor Fallette and her colleagues did is they coded these schools, they categorized them based on their diversity policies. And there are three main types of diversity policies that are in place in schools. And the first one is what we call the Assimilationist Policy. It's those schools that treat their minority students as Belgians. They are expected to speak Dutch only at school, to not wear a headscarf, and to behave just like all majorities do. A second type of diversity policy that schools can employ is the multiculturalist one. Here, both teachers and directors and everybody and students alike, they say that they are committed to learn, understand, and value cultural diversity. And a final type of school policy is what we call the individualist or colorblind schools that claim that it's best to treat everybody like an individual without making distinctions based on sociocultural backgrounds. Now, and from these diversity policies, the researchers then predicted students' grades at school. So what they found was actually a very harmful effect of the individualist policies. So what you see on the graph is that the more these universalist policies were in place, the lower were the grades, and these are average grades across all courses for both minority and majority students alike. And this effect was larger for minority students. It was up to 8 grade points. So the more they said sociocultural backgrounds do not matter, the lower students' grades. And the same thing was actually true in schools that endorsed an assimilationist policy, so that banned the headscarf or that banned any other languages at school. An opposite effect was found for schools that endorsed multiculturalist policies at school, that actually valued and celebrated diversity. So, and what I plotted here are the scores for Dutch grades, so Dutch language learning in schools that value different languages. So, and what you see here is that actually the more that these policies were implemented, the higher were the grades of minority pupils. And this effect was larger in schools with high diversity than in low diversity. So the blue line are the schools that are lowly diverse, and there you see that it does not matter too much how much you implement these multiculturalist policies. But for the highly diverse schools, this matters a lot, and students may actually score up to 10 grade points higher on their Dutch exams, and this is a persisting effect over years if there are multiculturalist policies at play. So, is this all magic again? Well, no. Many of the effects, and this also has been argued by Professor Mudud and also by Orhan, they have argued it for language and religion, is that most of these effects can be explained by belonging. In these multiculturalist schools, students feel like they belong, and when people belong to a certain context, they feel empowered to thrive in that context. So, I hope to have shown you that with multiculturalist education and multiculturalist practices at schools, that we can actually face the challenges of a diverse society. And perhaps with some minor tweaks in how we speak about and how we deal with diversity, we can already have a tremendous impact on how people from non-minority backgrounds thrive in our society. So what are we waiting for? Thank you.